I'm Clara, a 40-year-old French teacher. Life was pretty standard, filled with books, classes, and the occasional coffee with friends. I never expected it to take a dramatic turn until Mrs. Lefevre, an old friend of my mother's, decided to play matchmaker. One afternoon, while I was sipping tea at my mother's house, Mrs. Lefevre dropped by. She was a lively woman in her 60s, always with a story to tell or a plan up her sleeve. "Clara, dear, I have the perfect man for you," she exclaimed as she settled into the armchair. I chuckled, a bit skeptical. "Really, Mrs. Lefevre? And who might this perfect man be?" She leaned in, her eyes twinkling with excitement. "My son, David. He's a widower, a wonderful father to 2 teenagers. I think you two would hit it off." I hesitated, the idea of stepping into a ready-made family seemed daunting. "I don't know, Mrs. Lefevre. Stepping into a family, it's a lot." She waved her hand dismissively. "Nonsense. You're a warm, loving person. And David is such a caring man. Plus, the kids are lovely, really." My mother, who had been listening quietly, joined in. "Clara, it wouldn't hurt to meet him. You never know what life has in store for you." Encouraged by their enthusiasm, I agreed. A meeting was set up at a local cafe the following week. The day arrived, and I found myself sitting across from David, a man with kind eyes and a gentle demeanor. We talked about everything, from our jobs to our hobbies. He was a civil engineer and loved hiking, while I shared stories about my teaching and my love for French literature. "Your mom tells me you're a fantastic teacher," David said, smiling warmly. I blushed slightly. "Well, I love my job. Teaching French is my passion." "And your mom mentioned you're quite the hiker." He laughed. "Yeah, when I get the chance. But with Sophie and Max, my free time is usually spent on more family-oriented activities." The way he spoke about his children, Sophie and Max, was endearing. They were 14 and 12, stepping into the challenging teenage years. "We all have our hands full with teenagers, don't we?" I joked, thinking of my rowdy students. By the time we finished our coffees, I felt a connection with David, a sense of understanding and mutual respect. We agreed to meet again, and I found myself looking forward to it. After David and I got married, life settled into a comfortable routine that I cherished deeply. The addition of Sophie and Max, David's children, into my life was a source of joy, filling a gap I didn't know existed. I loved being a part of their lives, even though they never called me mom. The bond we shared was unique and special in its own way. One lazy Sunday afternoon, I found myself in the kitchen, baking cookies with Sophie. The air was filled with the sweet aroma of chocolate and vanilla. "Clara, do you think these cookies will turn out okay?" "I'm not very good at this," Sophie said, a hint of doubt in her voice as she mixed the dough. I smiled at her. "You're doing great, Sophie. Baking is like learning a new language, it takes a little practice, but you'll get the hang of it." Sophie beamed, her confidence boosted. "Thanks, Clara. It's fun baking with you." Just then, Max bounded into the kitchen, his energy almost palpable. "What's cooking, ladies? It smells awesome." "We're making cookies. Want to help us with the decorations later?" I asked, knowing his creative flair would add a fun element to our baking. Max nodded enthusiastically. "Sure. I'll make them look super cool." The afternoon passed with laughter and light-hearted banter. It was moments like these that made our house a home. Later that evening, as we sat down for dinner, the conversation turned to our plans for the upcoming holiday. "How about we go hiking this year? There are some great trails not far from here," David suggested, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Sophie seemed intrigued. "Can we camp overnight? I've always wanted to try that." Max chimed in, "Yeah, and maybe do some fishing too." I watched the animated discussion, feeling a warm sense of belonging. That sounds like a great idea. A little adventure for the family, I added. David reached across the table, giving my hand a gentle squeeze. Thanks for being so open to this, Clara. I know outdoor stuff isn't really your thing. I laughed. Well, I might not be the outdoorsy type, but I'm definitely up for new experiences. Especially with you all. The dinner continued with plans and ideas being tossed around, each of us contributing to the holiday itinerary. It was a simple meal, but the warmth and love that filled the room made it memorable. That night, as David and I cleaned up the kitchen, he turned to me, his expression soft. Clara, I just want to say, you've been amazing with the kids. They've really opened up to you. I leaned against the counter, a contented sigh escaping my lips. I love them, David. They're great kids, and I just want to be there for them, in whatever way they need. He wrapped his arms around me, pulling me close. In that embrace, I felt the strength of our family bond. It was a bond that had grown over shared experiences, mutual respect, and love. I went to bed that night feeling grateful and fulfilled. Shortly after our wedding, David's mother, Mrs. Lefevre, suffered a stroke that left her paralyzed. In the blink of an eye, our lives changed drastically. I took on the responsibility of caring for her, balancing this new role with my job as a French teacher and managing household chores. These were challenging times, but I found solace in providing comfort to someone who had welcomed me with open arms into their family. Years passed, and Mrs. Lefevre's health continued to decline. Then, one fateful morning, she passed away. The loss hit me harder than I expected. She had become like a second mother to me. The day after her passing, the house was quiet, an eerie calm that felt unnatural. I was in the kitchen, lost in my thoughts, when David and the kids came in. Their expressions were solemn, but there was a strange undercurrent of anticipation in their voices. Mom's lawyer will be here this afternoon to discuss the will, David said, pouring himself a cup of coffee. Sophie chimed in, her tone surprisingly light. I wonder what Grandma left for us. She always said she had some savings aside. I was taken aback by their conversation. Shouldn't we be focusing on arranging a proper service for her? She was a big part of this family. David shrugged. We'll take care of that, but there's no harm in looking ahead, Clara. Mom would have wanted us to. As the day progressed, their excitement over the inheritance became more apparent. It was as though Mrs. Lefevre's passing was merely a pathway to financial gain. I couldn't help but feel disturbed by this blatant display of greed. That evening, after the lawyer's visit, David and the kids gathered in the living room, eagerly discussing the inheritance. I stood at the doorway, listening to them. So, we're getting a good amount, then? Max asked, his eyes gleaming. David nodded. Yes, enough to make some significant changes around here. Sophie's laughter filled the room. Finally, I can get that new laptop I wanted. I stepped into the room, unable to contain my disappointment. Is this really what's important right now? Your mother just passed away. David looked at me, his expression cold. Clara, you wouldn't understand. This is family stuff. I felt a sting at his words. I cared for your mother for years, David. How can you say I wouldn't understand? He scoffed, turning away. Just because you looked after her doesn't mean you're entitled to anything. You did what any decent person would do. In the weeks that followed, David and the kids became increasingly distant and dismissive. Their attitude towards me changed from indifference to outright rudeness. David's remarks became more cutting, and the children, following his lead, treated me with a lack of respect that I had never experienced before. One evening, as I was setting the dinner table, David walked in, his face stern. Clara, you need to step up your game around here. The house has been a mess lately. I looked around, bewildered. The house was as tidy as it always was. I've been doing my best, David. I don't understand what's changed. He shrugged, his voice harsh. Just saying, you could do better. After all, it's not like you're contributing much else around here. I felt a lump form in my throat. The man I had married, the family I had embraced, were now treating me like an outsider, an unwelcome burden. The shift in my family's demeanor after Mrs. Lefevre's passing wasn't gradual, but a sudden plunge into a cold, unfeeling world. David and the children's behavior towards me transformed overnight from distant to openly hostile. Every day brought a new barrage of insults and nagging, and I was treated less like a family member and more like an unwelcome servant. One particularly harsh evening, as I was setting the table for dinner, David entered the kitchen, his face twisted in a sneer. "Clara, why is dinner not ready yet? You really can't do anything right, can you?" Stunned by his harsh tone, I replied, trying to keep my composure, "I'm doing the best I can, David. Dinner will be ready in a few minutes." He scoffed, looking around with disdain. "You know, I only tolerated you because you were useful, taking care of my mother and the kids. But now? You're just a burden." His words cut through me like a knife. I stood there, the plates in my hand feeling heavier than ever. Sophie walked in, her voice dripping with contempt. "Yeah, Clara, you should be grateful we even let you stay here. You're just a scary, old, and useless woman." Max, not to be outdone by his sister, chimed in mockingly, "Yeah, who would want you around? You're like a ghost haunting this house." Every word was a blow to my spirit. I had dedicated years of my life to this family, caring for them as my own, only to be reduced to this pitiful state. I served dinner in silence, their cruel laughter and jibes echoing around me. That night, as I lay in my bed, the day's events replayed in my mind. David's cruel declaration that I was nothing more than a now useless caretaker, Sophie's and Max's hurtful comments. It all hammered home the painful reality that the family I had loved and cared for saw me as nothing more than an expendable servant. The following days were no better. Every task I did was met with criticism and disdain. I was constantly reminded of my place in the household, a place that seemed to have no respect or kindness. One afternoon, as I was cleaning the living room, David walked in with a look of annoyance. "Clara, have you seen my blue tie? I can't seem to find it anywhere." "I washed and hung it in your closet yesterday, David," I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Well, it's not there now. Can't you do anything right? You're just taking up space in this house," he snapped, storming off. I finished my cleaning, each sweep of the broom feeling heavier with the burden of his words. The home I once cherished now felt like a prison, filled with contempt and scorn. Living in a constant state of belittlement and disrespect had taken its toll on me. Each day in David's house was a battle against his and the children's growing cruelty. I began to contemplate the painful decision of leaving, but my worsening leg pain and the lack of financial resources made me feel trapped. One chilly morning, as I limped around the kitchen, preparing breakfast, David stormed in, his face twisted in annoyance. "Clara, why is everything taking so long? You're moving like a snail." I tried to hide my pain. "My legs aren't what they used to be, David. I'm moving as fast as I can." He rolled his eyes. "Excuses, always excuses. You're just a burden, you know that?" The words stung, but I remained silent, focusing on setting the breakfast table. Sophie and Max entered the kitchen, their expressions mirroring their father's impatience. "Ugh, why do we always have to wait for Clara? She's useless," Sophie muttered, sitting down with a huff. Max didn't bother to hide his disdain. "Yeah, if she can't even make breakfast properly, what good is she?" I served them breakfast, each word from them like a dagger to my heart. As they ate, I sat down at the far end of the table, my appetite gone. After breakfast, I retreated to my room, the pain in my legs growing with each step. The lack of empathy and the constant insults from David and the kids were unbearable. I sat on the edge of my bed, the reality of my situation sinking in. I needed to leave, but I was scared and unsure of how to proceed. Later that day, I mustered the courage to speak to David. I found him in the living room, reading a newspaper. "David, can we talk?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He glanced up, his expression one of irritation. "What is it now, Clara?" "I've been thinking, maybe it's best if I leave. I don't feel welcome here anymore," I said, my voice shaking. David looked at me, a smirk forming on his lips. "Leave? And go where? You have no money, no place to go. Your mother died without leaving you anything to inherit. You're stuck here, Clara, whether you like it or not." His words were a harsh reminder of my dire situation. I felt a sense of despair wash over me. He was right, I had nowhere to go. My job as a teacher had been my only source of income, and with my leg condition, I couldn't even do that anymore. I had to resign from school. It was a bitter, but the only right decision. The following days were a blur of household chores, nagging, and insults. David and the kids treated me with utter disregard, their words and actions reinforcing the painful truth that I was no longer a part of this family, but a mere inconvenience to them. As I struggled with my pain and loneliness, I began to secretly plan my escape. I started saving whatever little money I could, hiding it away for the day I could finally leave. The thought of freedom, of being away from the constant belittling and disrespect, was the only thing that kept me going. One afternoon, while David and the kids were out, I sat at my old laptop, nursing my aching legs. Browsing aimlessly, I discovered a website for online tutoring. A thought struck me: could I leverage my skills as a French teacher in a new, virtual setting? Hesitant, but driven by a newfound purpose, I set up a profile on the site. "Experienced French teacher available for online lessons," I typed, my heart racing with both nervousness and excitement. The next few days were a whirlwind. To my amazement, requests for lessons began to pour in. My afternoons, once filled with loneliness and despair, were now occupied with teaching French to eager students from around the world. One day, as I finished a lesson, Sophie walked in, her eyes narrowing at the sight of the laptop. "What are you doing?" she asked suspiciously. "I'm teaching French online." "It's something I'm good at," I replied, trying to keep the defensiveness out of my voice. She scoffed. "As if anyone would want to learn from you." I ignored her remark, feeling a sense of pride in my small but significant accomplishment. As weeks turned into months, my reputation as an online French tutor grew. I started earning enough to entertain the idea of independence, of a life away from the constant degradation I faced at home. The days that followed saw me juggling my newfound career with the household chores. Despite the physical pain and the emotional drain of living in a hostile environment, I found solace and strength in my teaching. Each lesson I gave was a step closer to freedom, a reminder that I was capable, valuable, and deserving of respect. The tension in the house reached its zenith the evening David announced his promotion at work. That night at dinner, the air was thick with a sense of foreboding. David, Sophie, and Max were unusually chatty, their voices laced with a smug satisfaction that sent a chill down my spine. As I served dinner, trying to ignore the dull ache in my legs, David cleared his throat, ready to make his announcement. "I've got some news. I got a promotion at work. With it, I bought a new house. Bigger, better, and it suits our new status." Sophie clapped her hands in delight. "That's amazing, Dad. When do we move?" David's gaze shifted to me, cold and calculating. "We will be moving soon. But Clara won't be joining us." The room went silent. I looked up, my heart sinking. "What do you mean, David?" He smirked, his words cutting through the air like a knife. "You're not coming, Clara. You don't belong in that part of our lives. You were useful once, but not anymore." Sophie joined in, her voice dripping with disdain. "Yeah, Clara. You're just an old, limping woman. What use would you be in our new house?" Max laughed, adding insult to injury. You should be grateful we let you stay here this long. I stood there, the plates in my hands trembling. The pain of their words was sharper than any physical ache I had ever felt. David slid the divorce papers across the table to me. I think it's best we part ways. You can stay here until the house is sold. Numb, I picked up the papers. My hands were shaking as I signed them. There was no point in arguing or pleading. The people I had once called family had shown their true colors, and they were ugly and cruel. The next morning, I began to put my plan into action. While David and the kids were out, I packed my belongings. Each item I placed in the suitcase was a step towards my freedom. When David and the kids returned, they found me at the door, suitcase in hand. David's expression was one of surprise and confusion. "What are you doing, Clara?" he asked, his voice laced with a hint of concern. I straightened my back, facing them with a newfound strength. "I'm leaving, David. I will not stay here and be treated like a worthless burden." David scoffed. "Where will you go? You have nothing." I smiled, the first genuine smile in weeks. "I have more than you think. I have my dignity, my skills, and I have plans. You will not see me begging." In my rented apartment, a modest but serene space, I was rebuilding my life, one online French lesson at a time. The freedom and tranquility here were in stark contrast to the oppressive atmosphere I had escaped from. One evening, as I was reviewing lesson plans, my phone erupted with the frantic ringing of a call from David. His voice, laced with panic and anger, filled the room. "Clara, what the hell have you done? Sending those recordings to my boss? Do you have any idea what you've caused?" he bellowed, the sound of his fury resonating through the phone. I leaned back in my chair, a smirk playing on my lips. "Oh, you mean the recordings of all the lovely things you and the kids said to me?" "Yes, I did send them." In the background, I could hear the unmistakable cries of Max and Sophie. "Tell her to fix this, Dad. She's ruined everything." David's voice cracked with desperation. "Clara, please. Because of those recordings, I'd been demoted. I can't afford the mortgage on the new house. You have to help us." The sounds of their pleading were music to my ears. "Help you? After the way you all treated me? You made your bed, David. Now lie in it." His voice rose to a near scream. "You can't do this to us. We're your family." I laughed, a deep, hearty sound that felt liberating. "Family? No, family doesn't treat each other the way you treated me. You and your kids were nothing but cruel and abusive. This is your karma, David." Sophie's voice cut through, shrill and pleading. "Clara, please. We didn't mean any of it. We'll change, I swear." Max joined in, his voice laced with fear. "Yeah, Clara, please. We're sorry. We need you." I stood up, pacing the room as I replied, "Sorry? Your words and actions broke me. But guess what? I picked up the pieces and put myself back together. Without you, I owe you nothing." David's voice was a mix of rage and helplessness. "You're going to let us lose everything?" I stopped pacing, standing tall and proud. "Yes, David, I am. You and the kids have made your bed, and now you get to sleep in it. Goodbye." I hung up the phone, a sense of satisfaction washing over me. I had stood up to them, not with malice, but with the strength they never thought I had. Over the following weeks, I heard from mutual friends that David and the kids were struggling. They couldn't pay the mortgage, and the bank had taken over the house. They were forced to move into a small rented apartment, and both Sophie and Max had to take up jobs to help make ends meet. As for me, my online tutoring was flourishing. I was saving money, not just for my day-to-day needs, but for a house of my own. A place where I could live in peace, away from the shadows of my past.
All right, everyone's presentations are done, Nick, the manager, said as he tried to move the discussion forward. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me and began to speak. There's apparently someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. His lackey, Mike, of course, agreed with Nick. I'm leaving. After leaving the meeting room, I started to shut down my computer. I noticed that an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking, there's no point in speaking up, no one will listen, I went home quietly. The next day, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. He was staring at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick? Is something wrong? Mike looked at the screen with him. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Knowing the reason for Mike's distress, I thought to myself, serves them right. My name is Adam. My mother passed away when I was in the 9th grade, and I was raised by my father. Well, you could hardly call it being raised. After my mother passed, my father changed. He drowned his sorrows in alcohol, and though he still went to work, he squandered our living expenses on horse racing. Because of that, I had to start working part-time as soon as I entered high school. Every month, I went to the convenience store with bills in hand that couldn't be auto-deducted from my father's account. Even though I endured it because I didn't want to be alone, I reached my limit in my second year of high school and dropped out. I found a live-in job at a distant inn. Thank you for everything. The day I left home, my father, still staring at the TV, spoke. Take care. That was our last conversation. Back then, 18 wasn't the age of majority, so I needed my father's permission to work, and I couldn't hide my place of employment. Yet, my father never visited me even once. I kept working just to survive, and before I knew it, I was 42. Years of hard work paid off, and I was transferred to the headquarters. I was thrilled to be recognized by the company, as I thought I'd be working in the field until retirement due to my lack of formal education. Listen up. Our work can change the future of our employees. Don't drag us down. On my first day after the transfer, Nick, dressed in an expensive suit, spoke sternly. There was a reason for this. Our inn was located in a prominent tourist destination, known so well that everyone in the state could sing its commercial jingle. At its peak, we had 5 locations within the state. But that was long ago. Due to financial difficulties and aging facilities, only the place where I had worked for many years and the original establishment remained. I was prepared to lose my job anytime, but now there was a glimmer of hope. With the rise of social media, the tourist area where the inn was located started gaining attention again. Depending on how hard the sales department, where I was transferred, worked, we could either thrive or be forced to give up this prime location to the new hotel chains continuously popping up. For Nick, who had switched careers from another industry to strengthen our sales, this was a battle he couldn't afford to lose. I understood why he had to be strict. I will do my best. Nick sneered at my enthusiastic declaration. Did you not hear what I said? I'm sorry. I thought I was listening carefully. Out of habit from years of customer service, I apologized reflexively, though I had no idea what had offended him. Someone was watching me with a smirk. In this department, there are those who are expected to excel and those who have been shoved here because they have nowhere else to go. You are the latter. It was Mike, the section chief. He's 7 years younger, at 35. But he was called to headquarters much earlier than I was and had been moving around within the headquarters ever since. I'm not jealous, but I can't accept that he's my boss. Graduating from a prestigious university, he has an unusually high pride and caused many problems as a newbie, making things very difficult for me when I was the front desk leader. When I found out Mike was transferred to the sales department a month before me, I was disheartened. Mike is right. With just a middle school diploma, there's not much you can do. Don't even think about achieving results. As if I didn't exist, Nick remarked, I'm thirsty. Mike eagerly ran to the coffee maker. It seems Mike is Nick's lackey. I regretted being happy about my transfer to headquarters, wishing I had stayed on site forever. Send a direct mail to every company on this list by the end of the day. Nick only assigned me tasks that even a new graduate could handle. What? There are over 1,000 companies. You want me to send to all of them by today? Yes, if you and your fellow misfits split the work, even those with nowhere else to go should finish by today. I glanced at the employees typing away expressionlessly. They were worn out from customer service, only thinking about leaving on time, or were women reassigned after having children. With zero motivation for work. Even Sam, a new graduate from the same university as Mike, who was supposed to be among the expected achievers, had no enthusiasm for the job. Having joined the company wanting to do customer service. I don't care what they say, I plan to quit any time, he said. Only Nick and Mike were highly motivated, making all the decisions between the two of them. I originally only wanted to work at the inn to survive and had no particular attachment to this job. I swallowed my words, thinking I had no right to reprimand them. About a month after the transfer, Nick told us with a frustrated look. To commemorate the 50th anniversary, we've decided to create a plan exclusive for one group per day. Originally, Mike and I were supposed to come up with it, but our president, Mr. Thompson, insists on hearing everyone's opinions. So, you all get a chance. As Nick explained, Mike began handing out prints. Make sure not to embarrass Nick. If your ideas are half-baked, you'll have to redo them. It seemed that they had printed his handwritten notes by Mr. Thompson, which included several questions and a section for free responses. It made sense why Nick had to seek our input, given that all responses had to be submitted to Mr. Thompson. We were given a week to think about it, and a meeting was scheduled to compile our ideas. My plan is to let guests enjoy both the old and modern America. Nick began the presentations. Guests would watch a master confectioner at a nearby traditional sweet shop make sweets in front of them. The welcome drink would be premium tea in a bottle. Nick's plan was certainly attractive. After his presentation, Nick called on us to present in the order we were seated. Just as I stood up for my turn. All right, everyone's presentations are done. Excuse me, I haven't. I recently found out something. Nick interrupted me. There's someone in this department who didn't graduate high school and is just a part-timer. He was likely talking about me. I joined the company as a part-timer and was made a full-time employee when I turned 20. That was 20 years ago, so Nick and Mike probably had no chance to know until recently. Meetings should be for employees only. Absolutely right. After that, Nick kept creating opportunities to solicit everyone's opinions, purposefully excluding me from speaking. The meeting unexpectedly heated up and went past the scheduled end time. A few people asked to leave, and the discussion continued with the remaining few. Still here? Normally, you'd leave in that situation. Though I had no attachment to the job initially, hearing kind words from customers made me want to make them happier. For someone like me, with nowhere to go, the inn was my home and customer service was my life. I felt pathetic about my current self. I'm leaving. I left the conference room and started shutting down my computer. I noticed an email had arrived, not in my personal inbox, but in the company's shared email. Thinking no one would listen to what I had to say anyway, I quietly went home. The next day, while preparing the DM as instructed, I heard a commotion from Nick's desk. In his haste to stand up, he hit his knee on the desk. He stared at his computer screen, his face pale. Nick! What's wrong? Mike, thinking he should be the first to rush over, approached Nick while still wearing his coat. He peered at the screen with Nick. And he turned even paler than Nick. Why is he so angry? Who is responsible for this company? Nick, more irritated than ever, asked, and Mike answered without checking. Probably Sam. Sam wasn't there because he was attending a morning training session for new hires. Nick gave up on getting angry and returned his gaze to the screen. They were looking at an email that arrived right after the end of the working day yesterday. Apparently, no one, including me, had checked it before leaving. The email was from a large company that used us for their annual employee trips. The president and executives of that company also frequently used our services personally. President of the company, Mr. Mason himself, had declared that neither he nor his company would ever use our services again. Well, some companies cancel their employee trips or stop using our services due to financial struggles. Let's just move on. Mike kept wiping the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. Knowing why Mike was so agitated, I quietly watched their interaction. Do you know how much revenue we get from that company? We can find other guests to fill the rooms, but we'll lose the banquet costs, gift shop revenue, rental car fees, and more. Moreover, the gifts were supposed to be prepared by the traditional confectionery shop involved in Nick's proposed plan. If it's known that we incurred such a huge loss at this critical time, Nick's position in the company would be jeopardized. Nick took a deep breath, seemingly trying to calm himself. All right, Mike. Go to New York right now and apologize to Mr. Mason. What? You're coming with me, right? I have urgent work to do. I trust you, which is why I'm entrusting this to you. Please. Mike, believing Nick's sincerity, agreed with a determined look on his face, saying, yes. That's Nick for you. Even if Mike went to apologize, Nick would shift all the blame onto him if the client didn't change their mind. Well, it was Mike's fault to begin with, so it served him right. About 3 hours later, Sam answered a call from somewhere and repeatedly apologized, saying, I'm very sorry. Everyone watched to see what was happening. After ending the call, he informed Nick with a weary tone. When Mike arrived at the client's company, he only made things worse, further infuriating Mr. Mason. He was demanding, get his boss here immediately. It was no wonder Sam was exhausted, dealing with such a call right after returning from training. What is that idiot doing? All right, Adam, you're coming with me. If sacrificing Mike didn't work, then I must be next. Normally, I'd want to refuse at all costs, but I saw an opportunity in this situation. If I can be of assistance, I'd be happy to join you. I obediently followed Nick, and we flew to New York. When we introduced ourselves at the reception, it became clear how serious the situation was, as the receptionist personally escorted us to the president's office. Angry voices leaked through the door, making both Nick and me uneasy. Excuse me. I'm Nick, the supervisor. I understand my subordinate has caused you trouble, and I deeply apologize. Nick, with his experience in the corporate world, knew enough to offer an apology before excuses. However, his customer service skills left much to be desired. I sighed as I saw Mike trembling like a small dog in the corner of the room. What kind of training are you giving your subordinates? Mr. Mason glared at Nick with a red face. The intensity of his gaze made even Nick take a step back. Regrettably, I joined this company only 2 years ago and was unaware of Mike's issues. I should have identified his shortcomings sooner. Indeed. I should have realized sooner. No sensible person would come to apologize and then give a lengthy presentation on the drawbacks of not using their inn. Nick froze, his mouth slightly open. Suspecting the worst, I picked up the documents that had fallen to the floor. It seemed Mike hastily prepared these documents on the plane, listing the disadvantages. Disadvantage 1: if you change the venue for the company trip, employees might suspect it's for cost-cutting reasons, leading to a negative impression. Reading it aloud half-jokingly, Nick snatched the papers from my hand and checked the contents with a furious expression. Among the stack of documents was a receipt from a nearby convenience store's copy machine. I felt a pang of dread, hoping he hadn't shown the receipt as well. What do you think he said when I asked what kind of nerve he had to do this? I'm very sorry. Faced with the dire situation, Nick must have thought there was nothing left to do but apologize. In a voice smaller than I'd ever heard from him, he uttered words of apology. He said, I'm a Harvard graduate. I don't believe I said anything wrong. Mike, what have you done? Forgetting his plan to pin the blame on Mike, Nick yelled loudly, even in front of Mr. Mason. I didn't do anything wrong. You're still saying that? Look at him. Mike pointed at me with a shaking hand. I was assigned to headquarters in my 20s and now I'm a section chief. This guy only made it to headquarters at 42. Everything I've done proves I was right. So why are we losing the contract? Having said his piece, Mike collapsed to the floor. Of course. You were sent there because you had nowhere else to go. Mike never expected to hear such words from someone he looked down upon. He lunged at me, and Nick hurriedly stepped in to stop him. Mr. Thompson told me Mike is a quick thinker, and to take good care of him. There's no way he was pushed aside. Don't make things worse here. He didn't say quick thinker, he said only quick-witted, didn't he? I don't remember that part. I recalled the many troubles Mike caused when he was a newbie. When Mike was on the front line, his pride was so high that he never apologized to customers. Customer service, especially in our job, doesn't work alone. It brings both good and bad situations. If the front staff or housekeepers made mistakes, or the cleaning company didn't properly clean a room, one had to apologize to the customers regardless of personal fault. Mike, in such situations, would never apologize, insisting he wasn't at fault. This often angered customers, and as the front desk leader, I frequently had to apologize on his behalf. He caused complaints and disrupted operations, which is why he was quickly moved to headquarters. In departments where he didn't interact directly with customers, his quick thinking was beneficial and things went well. But it seemed his flaws were starting to show. Corporate reservations are supposed to be entered into the system by the sales representative. But a quick check yesterday revealed that more than 10 items were missing from the client's reservation. The handover document clearly stated what needed to be prepared. Why didn't you enter it into the system? Why do we have to give them special treatment? Filling rooms near the banquet hall, setting up all the food in advance. Specifying the brand of wine, they're too demanding. No wonder he always angered customers, I thought, feeling a headache coming on. Grouping them in rooms near the banquet hall is for our benefit too. It makes it easier for the staff to set up beds and serve breakfast since everyone's schedule is synchronized. As for the other requests, Mr. Mason suggested them to lighten our load. I didn't know that. Nick finally seemed to realize that Mike was the one who had angered the client. What did you say to them? I just told them we wouldn't give them special treatment anymore. We shouldn't waste effort on things that don't bring in money. I was utterly exasperated at his lack of understanding of customer service. Of course, we shouldn't comply with unreasonable demands. But carrying over successful practices from past stays makes customers feel remembered and enhances their experience. Good memories encourage repeat visits. That's part of our job. I looked down at Mike, who was sitting on the floor. In our job, nothing is a waste. Mr. Thompson likely moved you to the sales department, hoping you'd finally understand this. How do you think he feels now that you've failed to meet his expectations? Mike, tears in his eyes, fled the president's office. I was amazed he still hadn't apologized. You have it tough, Adam. It's okay, we're all employees of the same company. I deeply apologize for this disrespectful incident. Especially after all the care you've shown us. If it weren't for you, Adam, I really would have stopped staying here. When I heard you were moving to the sales department, I was willing to reconsider if you handled it. Seeing us talk so amicably, Nick's face contorted. Do you two know each other? Adam's service is excellent. I always requested him specifically. Normally, we don't accept specific staff requests, but we made an exception for Mr. Mason, adjusting my shifts accordingly. He had personally stayed at our hotel just before my transfer, and during casual conversation, I mentioned, I'm moving to the sales department soon. If I hadn't told him then, things could have been much worse. Please continue to take care of us. I look forward to it. On the return flight, Nick awkwardly offered me a can of beer. It's still working hours. Of course, I had no intention of forgiving him for a single beer. Nick might try to pin everything on Mike and avoid any consequences. While pondering this, a startling fact came to light. Nick, the tea bottles for the plan have arrived. I handed Nick a bottle labeled with our inn's name. They look good. What are you talking about? These are plastic bottles. I had assumed we would use the trendy, high-end bottling tea. But what arrived were ordinary plastic bottles of tea with customized labels. The only unique aspect was the label, which had the inn's name, making it look customized. Upon further investigation, I discovered that a substantial amount of money was set to be paid to the tea company. It was priced like bottling tea. Does this plastic bottle really cost $100 each? The tea inside is specially blended for us. The extra cost is for that. Wouldn't it be better to use another tea company? Or is there a specific reason we must use this one? As Nick continued to make excuses, I showed him a printed email. I informed the tea company's president, Mr. Mitchell, that we discovered irregular payments and he confessed. He said you two were high school classmates and planned to split the extra money. That idiot. Why did he confess? That's not important. You should worry about yourself, this could turn into a police matter. Opening the bottle cap, I suggested. How about calming down with this tea? It supposedly has a relaxing effect. Nick drank the tea frantically. In the following days, decisions were made about their fates. Mike was reassigned to the General Affairs Department, with no chance of transfer or promotion, as per Mr. Thompson's orders. As for Nick, since the payment to the tea company hadn't yet been made, he narrowly avoided legal trouble. Instead, he was encouraged to leave the company, and to avoid further complications, Nick submitted his resignation. Rumor has it that connections between HR departments have made it difficult for him to find new employment. Even though it was good to have those two gone, something unexpected happened in the sales department. Everyone became motivated and united in refining the 50th anniversary plan. In the end, my plan was adopted. We collaborated with the Tourist Information Center to provide personalized guides. The plan, tailored to the number of guests, was truly special for the 50th anniversary. Hey, is Adam's family coming to stay? I immediately booked that special plan for my family. Sam noticed it on the reservation list and quickly picked up on it. Yes, I'm inviting my father. That's great. I might invite my parents too. I lacked the courage to face my father just as Adam. But here, with the confidence Mr. Mason praised, I felt ready. The 50th anniversary plan was a perfect opportunity to reconnect with my father. I hoped to bring back the days when we could laugh together as we once did.